Hi, welcome back to Parenting in the Trenches. We've got a unique topic today in our series on expecting baby, which, while we're still focusing in on infant care and self care and couple care, it's coming from a unique voice, perspective, and angle to a unique audience. So, while most of our episodes are listener based, tend to be the women of the world, this is directed more toward their partners or their male partners in particular. So we are looking at the research and the tips and the tools that help fathers father well. And Dr. Singley, Dr. Dan Singley, is a San Diego based board certified psychologist and the director of the Center for Men's Excellence. His research and practice focuses on mental health around men's mental health, with a particular emphasis on reproductive psychology and the transition to fatherhood. He could not be a more perfect guest for the topic we wanted to cover today. He conducts training and presentations around the country to assist individuals and organizations to enhance their level of father inclusiveness. He also founded the grant funded Basic Training for New Dads, Inc., which is a nonprofit and a networking application that was just for dads in order to give new fathers the tools they need to be highly engaged with their infants as well as with their partners. So I'll ask him more about that. He is the past president of the American Psychological Association's section on positive psychology, and he's served on the board of directors of the San Diego Psychological Association, including chairing the Men's Issues Committee, and currently serves on the boards of APA's Society for Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity, as well as Postpartum Support International. With well over 15 years of experience, Dr. Dan Singley specializes in the treatment of anxiety, stress, depression, and men's issues with a particular emphasis on parenthood. And in 2017, Dr. Singley was awarded the prestigious Practitioner of the Year award by American Psychological Association Society for the psychological study of men and masculinities. As I mentioned before, he's the founder of the Center for Men's Excellence, which is really an organization meant to improve the work around patients who are interested in taking control of their concerns in order to live fuller, more meaningful lives. And I have to read the part about his free time. In his free time, Dr. Singley likes to cook, surf, read, and drive his two sons to activities all over town so that they cannot escape his annoying, shrinky questions. Classic therapist move. Our kids are not going to turn out normal, are they? Dr. Singley, welcome. And thanks for taking out some time out of your busy schedule to talk to both the women of the world, but also their male partners who could probably use some support and some confidence boosting in the area of fathering, particularly for those who are doing this as a first round. So if they haven't had previous kids, this might feel a little overwhelming. So we're looking to kind of calm the nerves around that and increase the skill set. But before we get into the specifics, I would love to kind of talk to you about your perspective. You've done so much research. You've been doing this work for over 15 years. I'm sure you have a sense in the bigger picture of what has kind of created a more collective male experience of low confidence around infant care and partner support. And like, how did we land in a bit of a place? Is it cultural? Is it gender norms? Is it generational? Where did we get this from?
This is a great question, and I'll try to be as brief as I can. I also, just in your first comment, I love hearing you say, yes, the dads need support too.
Yeah.
We need this provided, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
In terms of your question about the sense of confidence in this kid. So yeah, broadly, I pull back to a kind of societal frame, and without getting too far on this, if you look at it, gender in general is sort of has been shifting, and masculinity is also very much under construction at this point, and it's about 50 years behind what the women's liberation, feminist movement in the 60s, 70s did to start to empower and question some of those arbitrary gender roles.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people say, like, oh, it's all biological. I'm like, yeah, some is biological, but a lot of it's stuff that we pick up along the way,
Mm-hmm.
including how we think about parenthood. And as I say, like, so for me, as a psychologist specializing in the psychology of men, my research is on early fatherhood, so the dude to dad transition.
Okay.
And I don't think about masculinity as one monolithic characteristic. I think of masculinities that have different dimensions and nuances to them. Fatherhood is one of them. And you can make a lot of caveats about different cultures or different countries or different areas, but generally speaking, in Western countries, fathers are expected to be much more involved these days than stereotypically our own father's generations were involved from the get-go.
Yeah,
Pregnancy, right
totally.
around birth, diapers and all this, right? Well,
Yeah.
part of what's difficult about that is that there's a general sense that fathers, guys, people thinking like, hey, you need to be a lot more involved. However, there's not much in the way of modeling for it, and so it's in that sense directly related to this cohort of new dads that are like,
Yeah.
I know I'm supposed to be super dad and be much more involved. However, nobody's giving me the direct training for it. As a society,
Right.
we've made room for guys to be really involved as dads, but we haven't necessarily accorded the respect of doing so. They're not still going to get dinged for being feminine or maternal or just not manly enough, as an example. So I think the modeling's not there about what to
Yeah.
do as a dad, and
Yes.
also simply the respect for doing it.
Good call. That makes so much sense to me. We're kind of in the sandwich of it, right? We're in the in between. The expectations have
Yeah,
changed, but the skill set hasn't risen to the occasion because it hasn't been shown to us. It's
I
not
call it the
modeled.
fatherhood
Yeah.
generation gap.
Aha. Bingo. Okay. I knew there was something going on there.
You
All
gotta have
right.
a term, right?
You got to have a term. It
Yeah.
helps us understand it. Yeah. So, what does your work tend to do to focus on in terms of closing the gap of that? I mean, you're really being practical about it with these organizations and tools and programs to help dads close that gap. What are you offering in there?
So I do. When you do mostly work with men in psychology, which I do, you learn to be very practical and
Mm.
applied. And so what we've got, what generally, there's my research, and the research focuses on generally what we've done that's new and different is historically research on fathers, on early fathers, has looked at fathers as what we call independent variables in research. In other words, aspects of the father that then have impact on partners and babies. And of
Yeah.
course, that's important, but in our program of research, we have the father as the dependent variable. We are looking at how does masculinity, how does social support, the relationship, cultural uh, factors and so on, how do those impact relate to the father? And then how does that impact his involvement with his infant? That's essentially
Yeah.
what we're focused on, is paternal involvement with infants and
Yeah.
measuring it and fostering it and what fosters it and what it bears and so on. So there's the research, which then for me as a clinician, it's nice to be able to then turn around and say, okay, well, a dad that's more depressed is more likely to be involved with his infant indirectly, arranging for things to happen and so on, but he's less likely to do the sort of roll up your sleeve and work. So I turn that around in the consultation room and just use it myself. More programmatically, we've been teaching classes for expectant dads for 15 years,
Cool.
since about 2007.
Mm.
Um, I do a lot, like talking with you now, as a privilege to get the word out. And I
Yeah.
do a lot of consultation and training at organizations to first say, hey, paternal perinatal mental health,
Mm.
it's a thing. Like 1 in 10
Yeah.
dads gets postpartum depression. You heard me
Yeah.
right. That's 10%. That's a huge number. And just trying to get the word out and helping folks to normalize the idea that dads need support. And there are
Right.
some key ways to do that.
I think what tends to happen is when one partner who needs support is depending on the other one who also needs support. it's feeling like a doubling down of heaviness, right? And
Oh yeah.
so, that's not the person that can actually contribute much, because they're also under resourced at that point. They're exhausted, they're depleted, they're trying to figure out their own mental health. What is happening to me? This adjustment is massive. It's not what I expected. That's not the person you can lean on in the same way that you may have expected, right? And I
Yeah.
do think that's like where the stigma comes up. Men don't have the same ability to admit that it's hard, because we haven't named why it might be legitimately hard, right?
Yeah,
You
so
want to hide it. Yeah.
the picture that you just painted is straight out of central casting for the work that I do.
Yeah.
I am regularly working, and I work with some, some trans dads and gay couples, but I also work, predominantly with heterosexual couples as well. So the male female piece is apt.
Yeah.
I am stereotypically working with a dad whose
Okay.
partner has depression, has significant postpartum depression
Yeah.
or anxiety or OCD or whatever. And that is the number one predictor of a father developing postpartum depression. One in two, literally one in two.
Wow.
Several meta-analyses have shown that when his partner, when female partner has postpartum depression, 50% of the time, so does the dad. And so
Dang.
this scenario, you said, like, yeah, he needs support. She may not be the person she may be there in spirit, but just,
Yeah.
she's beat to hell. She's got depressed
Yes.
and she's like vegetating, not getting out of bed, suicidal, and so forth. And so
Yeah.
that exact scenario where they both need a ton of support is one that I work with literally every day.
Mm.
And one of the sort of male specific factors, what you just mentioned, is the shame and stigma around mental health.
Yeah.
Yes, that's for everybody. It's even worse for men, though, because we've actually done research on the feminization of mental health and emotions and so on, and we identify these things as being more
Mm-hmm.
feminine than masculine. Big surprise.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there's a really, really important societal factor, which is right around the time when guys are starting to have kids, we are narrowing and paring down our social support. So your
Mm.
average guy who is in the process of being married, being partnered, going
Yeah.
hard at a career, having kids, is also slowly but surely,
Mm.
slowly letting go his social support. So when
Yeah.
he finds himself in this situation, not only does he feel entitled to have depression, to have anxiety,
Yeah.
guilty about trying to ask, their partner for help, but he's also very likely at a place where, like, well, man, if I reach out to my friends, like, they're not going to want to hear that, or they don't have kids, or they can't help. And the guy's able to talk
Yeah.
himself out of it. And this self-enforced isolation, even
Mm-hmm.
though they're around people a lot, that being
Mm-hmm.
withdrawn is a major contributor that I see all the time.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Well, and half the time they've got partners that are like, dude, um, go play golf, go meet up with the boys for coffee. Like half the time, it's not like they have some naggy partner that's like, no, I insist you're here like all the time. What I see is quite the opposite. Usually they've got a partner that sees, hey man,
Yeah,
you're not
you're not
taking care
okay.
of this part of your
Right.
self care. Go do it,
Yeah.
and the guy can but it. That's more the rule that I see.
Interesting. Huh. I do quite a bit of work around with couples at this stage of family development from a Gottman perspective. And so all that research, is so echoed in so much of what
Mm-hmm.
your research says as well. And so, what had come to mind was, there's some real focused attention on the uniqueness of fatherhood, the uniqueness of a
Mm-hmm.
father's contribution. And, I think if you come into a role, any role, with lack of confidence, you kind of default to the person that looks like they know what they're doing. Right.
Yes.
So I don't think this is any different. If there's something that looks more organic and your partner is able to just like pick up a baby and soothe and do the thing, and you're just kind of standing watching going, I can't do that, the baby's not going to respond to me the same way. Like it's immediately setting patterns of beliefs around these dynamics, right? So I was thinking about, like, in your research, what do you want to shine a light on that shows up about the important tangible things that male partners in particular can provide that feel of value, so they don't diminish their own worth in terms of what they can contribute to parenthood or partner
So
support for that matter.
yeah, so I love that you called out the Gottmans. I love their stuff. I pull from their
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
very regularly. Um, the confidence, the confidence piece that you're talking about. So to tease that out a little bit, again, I'm a little concerned about sounding sort of like sexist and heteronormative
I get you. Yeah.
in the way that I'm running through this. And this is
Yeah.
based on a lot of research and a lot of experience. So duly disclaimed.
Yeah.
Um, Self-efficacy reflects one's confidence to do a specific task. Change a
Okay.
diaper, give a bottle, swaddle a baby, give them a bath, or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Most people are familiar with the general concept of self-efficacy. Other efficacy reflects someone else's sense of belief or confidence in my ability
Hmm.
to do that thing. And so if we
Yes.
go back to the general sort of gendered socialization around early parenthood, that generally boils down to moms are better at slash good at the handling of newborns,
Mm-hmm.
infants, and babies,
Mm-hmm.
and dads are, the stereotype out there in most media, including children's books, tends to be the bumbling dad doesn't know what he's
Yep.
doing or he's absent or
That's
whatever.
right.
So
Yeah.
the implication is that if and the Gottmans talk about the sort of more gross motor, jazzed up play style
Mm-hmm.
that dads will
That's
have.
right.
There's
Yeah.
another outfit, Michel Paquette, who's up at Montreal. His research program looks at what he calls the paternal activation relationship, which involves taking a bit
Lovely.
more controlled risk on the part of fathers. To me, they sort of get at a similar kind of dynamic. Um, but if a dad wants to get involved, the way he's doing it might be a little bit different than his partner.
Yeah.
And if his female partner, if what he's doing makes her anxious, the most common response is what we call in the literature gatekeeping, maternal gatekeeping, or
Yes.
gate closing, which is essentially, dude, if what you're doing makes me anxious, I'm going to manage my anxiety by not letting you do it.
Take over. Yeah.
Correct. And then that often, again, this is a very common dynamic that most of us in the field have run into. And then what happens is he gets upset, he feels hurt, she feels anxious because they're not on the same page about it. She may not feel as safe. He gets more resentful, more distance and damage in the relationship, and he's not having those hands-on opportunities
Yeah.
to do the work to develop a sense of confidence that he can change the diaper, he can give the
Yeah.
bottle, he can do and so forth. And they get into this dance where they're both sort of locked in. And,
Yeah.
and usually the solution is you bring them in, you talk about, validate people's sense of anxiety, help them to empathize with each other, do some reality testing, and then set a quick, a lot of times the dads want to be like, well, she's not letting me do anything, so I'm just going to take the kid and go away for the weekend. I'm like, no, you're not, dude. That's not the answer here. Like,
Rein it
we're
in.
going stepwise. It's
Just.
basically a behavioral exposure hierarchy that we just come up with.
Yeah.
Here's a step, right? Like
Right.
she goes and takes a shower while she's showering. I'm on the kid. She comes back.
Yeah.
The kid didn't explode. Cool. Now I'm going to take the pram
Yeah.
around the
Yeah. Yeah.
block, and you
Yeah.
build from there. But that's a big thing about that I see around sort of
Yeah.
socialization and that confidence piece.
It's like shifting proof of a different kind, right? So otherwise, if left to its own devices, it's going to self-implode. Kind of just builds its own case. It proves the self-fulfilling prophecy. See, I knew you couldn't do it, right? Or see,
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't do it. Or see, you won't let me do it. And then we gather all this evidence from that framework that is actually the definition of a pattern, right? We've come to
Mm-hmm.
pre-expect this of our partner. And so now I'm anticipating this before you've even confirmed it for me. But lo and behold, I set the stage and then you do that. And then see, right? And you're just saying
Yeah.
like that early intervention or the prevention piece is so critical because we don't want the pattern to solidify or to turn into concrete between us. Is that it's so common for that to be kind of like what would naturally occur. Now we're going to intervene and say, hang on, we're going to consciously shift this. I'm not going to set this up for you this way. And I'm not going to be looking for confirmation. Makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
It's well said. And so, as I say, like we teach classes for expectant dads.
Yeah.
Here, I actually do it virtually now. So we got people from like Iceland and
Oh, that's so
Canada and
cool.
Alaska
Good.
and whatnot. I know it's not psychotherapy, so like you don't have to have a
Yeah,
license.
you can do that.
Um, and in it, one of the main points that we're trying to do is to instill in dads a sense of confidence,
Mm.
and the overall. And in it, we go through like, here's how you change a diaper. We got infant
Yeah.
CPR dolls. They got them. They're on the floor. They're like going through it,
Yeah.
and soothe and swaddle and so forth. But the main point is to give them a sense of confidence
Mm.
to be involved. Like, there's no
Yeah.
right way to be an engaged dad and partner.
Mm.
That varies a lot from household to household. But
Yeah.
where we're coming from is no matter what that looks like in your household, don't be a bystander,
Yes.
be involved. In order to do that, like you said, we need to change some frames about what it needs to look like, and having a sense of competence and faith that we can do it together.
We want dads to have the MO of being active, not passive.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. If we ask the mums who are listening to forward this to the dads that might not be listening yet, here's your like opportunity to nail what, if you could give 3 or 4 critical messages that you want to entice dads, like embolden them, give them, empower them, give them what they need to believe that they have a really good role. um, what some of the pieces might be that they don't feel confident in, that there's hope for, like there's a way to learn this, you're not left in the
Mm-hmm.
dark, there is support available. What would you want them to know? Talk directly to the dads. What are we going to provide for them?
So, top level, it's give the dads alone time with their newborns and infant as
Mm.
soon as possible.
Okay.
Not in a like, okay, now it's inequitable and it's, but rather as soon as is reasonable or feasible, that dad has one-on-one alone time with even with a newborn, skin to skin time. Dad takes it as much as possible, like, because there's just no substitute for experience
Yeah.
to develop that sense of confidence, to develop that sense of competence. And for a variety of reasons, sometimes that's really hard for their partners.
Mm.
And so, just that's my top level answer to your question. Now,
Yeah.
beyond that, it also involves how can the two parents work to be a partnership. And oftentimes that begins with what you communicate, how you communicate, and what you don't communicate.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, so for me as a dad, this as a person, I guess, a well-timed attaboy goes really far.
Yeah.
And it's one thing if I'm going to go clean the bottles or something, and then my wife comes in after me and is like, "Well, you missed a spot," and sort of redoes what I just did. That
Yeah.
actually erodes my sense of confidence or competence. But if I hear from her, "Hey, like, that was really cool that you got up in the middle of the night and you sort of took point, and that helped me to it's
Mm-hmm.
expressing gratitude on the one
Mm-hmm.
hand, and that needs to go in both directions. Like, it's actually one of my, but like, again, it was a little provocative probably, but like the in public momsplaining, where folks will,
Yeah.
like, typically moms will like walk up to a dad in the grocery store who's not doing anything noteworthy and be like, "You're being such a good dad." Like, sure, it's probably said in a really nice way, but it's also
Uh-huh.
like, okay, what, I get a
We
cookie
wouldn't
for like.
expect it.
Correct. And so
Yeah.
again, it's said with nicely, but it also, I'm not talking about that sort of thing in terms of
Right.
expressing appreciation, expressing gratitude,
Okay.
because I think parents need to do that just generally. But I
Yeah.
think being able to communicate in those ways about what their needs are and what they're hoping for, and also what's
Mm.
going well, that tends not to be as big of a focus, particularly right in that, like fourth
Yeah.
fourth trimester.
Well, fair enough. I mean, as human beings, we're constructed in ways that we don't develop out of a sense of shame. That's not a motivator for change, right? We don't
Not
grow out of that space. So if all we're hearing is the criticism, and that grows in the bank, I've collected a bunch of criticism today for the things I missed. That is, I think, the belief of the partner who delivers that criticism is the hope that I'm going to point out the things that aren't going well so that you can improve on them. But in actual fact, that's not how we're wired. We don't tend to gain a whole lot of improvement, right, out of that space. We grow and we build on what we feel successful in and gain confidence in.
So yeah, so going back to like a tool that I've ripped off from the Gottmans is the State of the Union meeting, and I use it
Okay.
constantly. I've got my own version of it, and
Yeah.
this is along these lines. Like I've asked hundreds of couples, and at this point, thousands of dads that have taken the class, like, do this, and it's a 5 minute meeting. A 10 minute State of the Union is a really long meeting. And in
Yeah.
it, each partner tells the other one, in order, here's something I think is going well in our relationship. Here's something I'm having some difficulty with in our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then third is, here's something that you, my sweetie, here's something you have done that helped me to feel loved, cared for, connected. It's sandwich feedback, but it's
Yeah.
2/3 positive, but it also
Yeah.
forces the couple to come together and address like the inevitable points of friction that they have. Like, to me, this is another way when you look at the communication and what partners can do and what dads themselves can do to try to keep their head in the game and to manage the relationship.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, your question, how do we keep the dads involved? How do we look out for them? If you're familiar with the research, the scholarly research on paternal involvement with their infants, the number one predictor of their involvement is a good relationship with their partner. Like, all over the place.
There
And
it
so
is.
that you got to talk about the relationship when you start asking that kind of
Yes.
question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go kind of a little bit backwards, but I want to add in, I think, a really important factor of, you mentioned like give dads skin on skin time as much as possible. And we're talking about that currently in the frame of like what that does for kind of a dad's sense of involvement. It goes beyond just meeting a baby's needs. It's bonding, right? Like, can you talk a bit about what's happening for the baby when a dad is holding them against their chest and
Can I
skin
flip, can,
to skin?
can I flip this? Actually, this is
Please do.
I'm gonna do my thing. Um, let's talk about what it does for the dad. So several researchers, her name's Ruth Feldman. She's out. Her program of research is out of Israel, and then Darby Saxby
Okay.
is a Southern California, and they both have long programs of phenomenal research that addresses the hormonal and the neurobiological changes of fathers, like right around birth.
I love this.
And one of the phenomenal studies that Ruth Feldman's lab did was they looked at, there are three groups. It was male, female, and the dad was the secondary parent. And then they had, I think it was like a single dads, and then they had gay dad couples. And essentially, what they did was she was looking at the extent to which it is hands-on involvement, skin to skin, hearing their cries, changing diapers, all
Mm-hmm.
this. How does that relate to, in this case, it was an fMRI study, and so they were looking at what parts of the
Yeah.
brain light up and evolve more. And essentially what she found was that gender doesn't matter, that fathers experience the exact same kind of growth and progression and lighting up of the
Mm.
emotional, affective, as well as the social interpersonal pieces that we've seen for a long time with the moms. So when you get down to that kind of a and there are correlates, like, fathers experience hormonal shifts right around the birth of their baby, same directions as
Yeah.
moms, lower
Yeah.
testosterone, higher estradiol, the vasopressin and the
Yeah.
pair all that. It's just not as high. The magnitude is
Yeah.
less, but the direction is the same. So, sort of a long way of saying, when that dad gets that baby on him, it is shifting his biology
Yeah.
so that he's more likely to pair bond. He's likely to be more emotionally available, not just to his baby, but more broadly. So, sure, of course, we can talk about attachment
Yeah.
and the empathetic and the attunement, serve and return. That's
Well, it's the
hugely
other half
important.
of it. Yeah.
And the dad is evolving. The dad is
Yeah.
physically changing as a result of this, and he needs it, but he may not know it.
The babies are growing us, aren't they?
Right? We all think
Yeah.
we're parents that are like
I know.
teaching our kids. I have learned, well, it's my kid that's actually
Mm.
shaping me. I get it.
Yeah. Good call. That's so good. And I love that reciprocity, because I do think it starts to, one of the factors of new parenting that starts to feel overwhelming is the constant giving and the not receiving back,
Mm-hmm.
or the
Yep.
depletion that kind of accumulates. And for us to sit with a different mindset as we're rocking a baby against our chest, to recognize this is reciprocal. We are both changing in this moment. And it's not tangible. Like, we don't see our rewiring, right? We don't see this happening and unfolding inside us till we go in an fMRI scanner and it comes out with this beautiful, colorful image that goes, oh, look what's lighting up. Look what's changed. But the average person doesn't have access to that. So even just trusting that that's what's happening can be really motivating when we're sitting in a chair with a baby, or lying on the couch with a baby, or playing or interacting. Imagine what is actually changing for you both, and how critical that is for stability going forward for both of you.
100% agreed. And
Mm.
I will point that in the direction of parents with postpartum depression think they suck.
Yeah,
They
right?
think they're terrible. They think
Yeah.
that they're bad for their babies, that they're not
Yeah.
connected to their babies, and it's a really dark
They
place
don't
to
feel
be.
it. They can't
And
access it. Yeah.
and for someone who is in that dark of a place,
Mm.
it can, it can be antenatally, but we talk more about the postpartum experience. You actually have the baby hearing that, look, this is happening, even though you have a mental frame that says, no, I'm bad and the
You're
future's bad and this is
skewing
bad.
it. Yeah.
I do a lot of holding up. I will literally hand research
Mm.
to patients. I work with a lot of technical folks, and so they'll sit up and salute. If I show them like an fMRI study, or like here's something that actually shows like
Yeah.
biologically an element of what you have going on in testosterone and postpartum
Yeah.
depression, like that can sometimes be a real entryway. But for somebody who is feeling super depressed and
Mm.
down and dark, they take that lack of sense of connection as
Yeah.
just more evidence that they're terrible and they're a bad parent. And
Yes.
it's just a cycle. It's difficult.
Self perpetuating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For people who are really struggling, in particular with the mental health, in addition to all the other pressures that come with new parenthood, um, what what do you recommend for men who maybe have not considered getting some support around their mental health?
Yeah. Um, for anybody, my suggestion: don't be isolated.
Okay.
The problem is there's so much stigma around mental health, and when
Yeah.
you look at perinatal mental health, the Hollywood version is rainbows and unicorns and
Yeah.
supermom and super dad, and you don't realize, 1 in 7 mom gets postpartum depression, 1 in 10
Yeah.
dads gets it. How much higher percentage of that have significant anxiety, and oftentimes folks' way of dealing with that is to just sort of lock themselves away or to just kind of power
Hmm.
through, but they avoid talking about it. They avoid addressing it. So
Yeah.
top level, my point is just don't be isolated. Be willing to take that risk and talk to somebody.
Yeah.
It may be your partner, it may be your friend, it may be your parent, it may be a trusted clergy person, it may be a therapist.
Hmm.
There are a lot of different options. But first is just don't, as much as possible, don't be isolated. Now, one of the ways, one of the philosophies that guides how I work with the men in my practice is, while I never condone bad behavior, I also do not shame people
Yeah.
for being who they are. And if
Yeah.
you ask your average person, certainly your average guy, like, what do you think it means to be a dad? They'll usually give you some version of protect and provide.
Hmm.
That's shifting a little bit, but when we talk about protect, they mean keep the saber-tooth tigers away, keep the food on the table,
Yeah.
and running that way. So for dads that are really struggling, but that may not be connecting to it, or that may sort of
Hmm.
be in denial about it, or they know it, but they just can't get past the guilt of taking the time to focus on themselves. One of the points that I'll make to them is, okay, here's what the research says about you being depressed and having a newborn. It says that beyond the provision of basic needs, one of the healthiest, long lasting, most important things that you can provide is the healthiest version of yourself. because there's a rich, extensive history on the long-term benefits of infants and
Yeah.
newborns up to 1 year of having a more engaged and involved father. So if you're not going to do it for yourself, if you really want to protect, provide,
Hmm.
pull the car over and work to provide the healthiest version of
Connection.
yourself. That tends to
Yeah.
be a light bulb because we're not used to thinking of ourselves as something that we
Absolutely.
provide.
Yeah. That's that I think is a fundamental shift in um our just in general of how have come to understand child development, what's important, and what we are truly providing. That it goes beyond a full belly and good sleep, right? There are those practical things that, of course, physiologically babies need for that stability and that growth and that, but I think it's a pretty relatively new understanding of our contribution to their social emotional growth and well-being and their bonding and how fundamental that is to everything else for thriving, right? So if we pull the car over and focus on ourselves, it means we've got something to offer our babies in quality form, right? Which is essentially what we're trying to aim for. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so the general point is for me as a clinician, I'm pretty direct with new dads, and I'll just, like I said, pull from the research and say, okay, look, you're really struggling with depression. That's causing you to not take some steps to better yourself or to be involved with your kid. You're really struggling with anxiety that maybe has you avoiding or not being as involved. But I asked the question, so do you want a kid that is a better emotional regulator? Do you want a kid that has more vocabulary words when the kid enters school? Do you want one with less involvement in the juvenile justice system, with a higher IQ, that's more agentic? If you want these
Yeah.
things, the research shows that having a highly engaged father during the first year predicts these things.
Yeah.
So you're able to yeah but and say, yeah, okay,
Hmm.
but like, don't yeah, but your way out of that. These are the things that you want for your child. And if your depression is talking you out of it, or your anxiety is causing avoidance, then work on that because your kid needs you.
Yeah. 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 And I think what tends to happen is we might acknowledge that that's true, and then we either say, well, that's why I have evidence that I suck at this because clearly I'm already harming my kid, right? As
Right.
opposed to what can I do about it, and what does it mean to do something about it? It doesn't mean to power through. It means to attend to the root issue, right? And if depression is the block, deal with the depression. Don't just say I'm going to grin and bear it for the next year and hope it disappears.
You can imagine some of my patients that are dealing with extreme depression that are coming from that same place.
Yeah.
We'll get to a point in therapy where I basically say to them, this is the fatherhood expert speaking. Um, Dude, just for now, forget about your kid. Sorry, but just for now,
Yeah.
rein it in. We're focusing on you
Yeah.
initially. They'll be like, "What? Did you just say that?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, that's where we need to
Mhm.
be right now."
Yeah. Yeah. And we need people to tell us that. We're not going to tell ourselves that, right? This is so it goes back to this fundamental piece where you said in the big picture, don't get isolated.
Yeah,
Don't let
don't be
yourself grow to the
alone.
point where you don't have a mirror, a voice, a place that actually reflects back to you what the heck is going on for you and can partner with you to get through that effectively. Yeah.
This is one of those ways in which the kind of like lone wolf, nothing knocks me off my spot. I can
Yeah.
handle anything version of kind of traditional masculinity. Like
Yeah.
that's very helpful in certain situations. However, if you take it rigidly and inflexibly to an extreme,
Yeah.
it does isolate you, and it's just not healthy.
Well, nobody wins out of that. I think there's got to be a belief. There's a motivating factor in that we believe we're serving somebody by being the lone wolf, and we're not. Nobody benefits.
Well, the point you made earlier about getting into a place of I'm gived out.
Yeah,
I give, and I give. You know, for us as therapists, we talk about compassion fatigue, and we talk about
yeah,
moms feeling touched out.
yeah,
But it's all kind of getting at the same basic point, which is
yeah.
there's a limit. There's a limit for everybody. It's not a gender
Everybody.
issue.
Right, right. Well, I plan to pack the show notes with some resources to refuel people and re engage, not just not just the male partners, but everybody who's in a couple relationship who wants to attune to one another, attend to one
Mm-hmm.
another's needs, support one another, and expand their village rather than shrink it. So I'll throw that all in there. Please go check it out before you drop off the audio. And yeah, we'll see you back here for next episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Singley, for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, and hope it's helpful info.